So we left at this point of the discussion of the Tosefta of Maaseh Bereshit, Maaseh Merkava, and like I said, Maimonides. We're going in order, so I want to bring like later commentary. But Maimonides, who was not fond of mysticism, tried to explain it differently, and to say that Maaseh Bereshit is the philosophical understanding of God, of what God. Sorry, this is Maaseh Merkava, the divine throne, that what God is, or more what God isn't, and Maaseh Bereshit is the rest of the spiritual universe, including the physical universe, including something that he called Galgalim, the wheels, that are based on Greek philosophy, that sort of the spheres that contain the planets. But if we go back to the Tosefta, we already see here that there's an idea of the control of the flow of knowledge, that not everything should be taught to everyone, and there are certain bodies of knowledge that are only given to carefully chosen individuals, and in this case, it's the laws of incestuous relationship, and that is because of, as I said, because of modesty, because the people felt uncomfortable talking about these issues in front of large crowds. The divine throne, I think, like John mentions, obviously refers, at least in the language of the rabbis, to the vision of the chariot, of the divine chariot that Ezekiel saw. And I didn't include the chapter because we're all familiar with the text, the description of the chariots and the wheels and hashmal, whatever this hashmal is. But we'll get to it through rabbinic literature that really had, I would like to say, like sort of a love-hate relationship with the text, because on one hand it was amazing and inspiring, on the other hand they were afraid of, I guess, people taking it too literally, and again to be at the point where it borders on paganism. And then there's the problem that still runs throughout mysticism till that very day, the problem of anthropomorphism, of attributing physical dimensions and attributes to God. So what would be Maaseh Bereshit? My interpretation, and that has to do with the end of that later in that chapter, verse 3, that speaks about, one is not to analyze and try to understand what was before. So I would say that Maaseh Bereshit is literally that, to understand the story of creation. And the rabbis were afraid that if you delve too much into the story of creation, you will eventually you'll come to that question, and what was before that, right? Because even the first three words, Bereshit bara Elohim, they are translated in so many different ways in all the different Bibles, and in the Art Scroll Humash, and even I think the JPS translates in the beginning of God's creation, that but it says in the beginning of. This is really how the verse would translate in Hebrew. In the beginning of, God created. I think that's the meaning, that deliberately the Torah left it in a way of construct which is unclear, to say in the beginning of something, blank. There's a blank there. God created, to either let us search or let us understand that we can never fill that void. And when we think today about the story of creation, you know that we have this battle between creationists and I wouldn't know if you should call them evolutionists, because the story is not really about evolution. It's about the moment of creation that is before the evolution of life. Maybe naturalists, right, where creationists stick to their guns when it comes to the Torah and says this is how it was. 6,000 years, give or take a couple of hundreds, but that's it. And what we know, based on scientific evidence, that we're talking about something between 13 to 15 billion years. But when you come to that moment of Malefanim, what was before creation, science and Torah or faith face the same problem. For the believing person, when that person speaks of Elohim, of God, of creation, there will always be the question, and what was before that? So where did God come from? Or who created God? Or, even if you accept it as an axiom, you say, why did God create the world? What was the event, what changed that God decided I have to create the world? Was there a will, a desire, a need? All these things would take away from the divinity. Now, when you go to science, you have the same problem. Because no matter how far back we go, before the beginning of everything, or the beginnings, if there are many, the multiverse, then you would always ask, at least the non-scientific person, let's say that the one who's really like the theoretical physicist, right, is somewhat of a Kabbalist. He's a mystic. For him, there's a way to grasp that. For us, there's no way to grasp it. They say, okay, so 1/1000th of a second before the Big Bang, we knew where all atoms were in the world. But what was before that? What happened before that mass was concentrated in one place? Where did matter come from? Right? Alan Guth is a physicist in Princeton, I believe, and he produced an equation that shows how something can be created out of nothing. And when he was pressed on that, he said, "Oh, so that means there's no creator?" He said, "No, I only said my equation, my formula only shows how, according to the laws of physics, something can be created out of nothing. But the question is, who created the laws of physics? It is a system. So there's always be something that you have to go back. Now, in a way, when you think of it, when we try to stretch our brain beyond that point, whether theologically to say who was there before God, or who created God, or how did God create himself, whatever the question is, and the question of how do I stretch infinity to the past or to the future, we're trying to contain something that is greater than us within our brain, and it's impossible. And maybe when we talk about the people who entered the orchard, we'll talk about it some more. But in any case, the story of Genesis, of the creation, cannot be taught to two people. It should be only taught to an individual. But you don't have to be that picky. I mean, you could take any individual who's capable of learning and study with him. But if you want to teach the divine throne, you cannot teach it even to an individual, even to one person, unless he is a wise person and understand on his own. And maybe my translation is not as accurate, because mevin is the ability to associate and to go to the next level without being being guided there. So there are very hard ones, and that is already included in the Mishnaic literature. So we're talking about 2nd century, 3rd century, pretty early. That is the first, we could say, the first evidence that we have in rabbinic literature about their engagement in mysticism. So then the Tosefta goes on to say this: Maaseh ברבן יוחנן בן זכאי שהיה רוכב על החמור והיה רבי אלעזר בן ערך מחמר אחריו. Now the people here, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was the leader of the people in Jerusalem before the destruction. It is about him that we have the famous story that he realized that the war is not leading anywhere and that everybody's going to die, and he wanted to broker some kind of peace with the Romans. He was smuggled out of the city in a coffin, saying that he's dead, and then went and addressed the commander, the Roman general, and negotiated with him and he got permission to take the scholars of Jerusalem and start a yeshiva in Yavne. That's the traditional story. Reality is probably different, that after the destruction, the Romans deposed the president of the Bedin, who was of the Davidic dynasty, because they did not want someone who's a contender, someone who would be able to inspire people to join a revolution and reestablish the Davidic dynasty, and instead they installed Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. So Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is the only link in, when you look at the presidency, is the only link who's not from the Davidic dynasty. He's an outsider. He was put there by the government. Before him you have the people from the house of Hillel, and after him from the house of Hillel. But he's the only exception. In any case, we don't know from anywhere else in the Mishnah that Rabban Yochanan had any mystical tendencies. That's the only place. And here, what? You had a question?
No.
Okay. So now Rabbi Yochanan is riding the donkey. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach is walking behind him. He leads the donkey. So obviously we have here a hierarchy, right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is the leader. He sits on the donkey. The rabbi, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, is walking behind him. Mechamer, he leads the donkey. Just factually, you would have thought that if he leads the donkey, he goes ahead, right? But the reason he goes behind the donkey, because donkeys have this nasty tendency to bite people. It happened to me and my siblings were in an Arab village in Israel when my brother was leading the donkey and it bit him. So I know that this, you don't do that. You go to the side of the donkey. You don't give him this opportunity to bite you. But it is also a very, I would say, mundane setting. They're riding a donkey, and the word hamor in other places in rabbinic literature is connected to the word homer, material. So it's something that really they're very much in this world. So then the student says, teach me one chapter in the divine throne. Shene perek ehad b'maaseh merkava. Now that phrasing is interesting, because what does it indicate when he says, teach me one chapter in the divine throne? We could look at it as like a little bit, right? One unit, one segment, or that there is actually a tractate, there is a text, a known text that is broken into chapters, and that people study it. So was there or was there not? We don't know. Later on, we do find the literature that what Caroline referred to before, the Chalut literature, but we don't know that they had that literature at that time. We'll speak about when we get there. One of the tools to analyze rabbinic literature is the language, core language, and references to real people and events. Also, you look at words, whether they're borrowed from the Greek or the Latin or the Persian. But most of Chalot literature is written in Hebrew. The indication that it might have come from a later period is that the Hebrew is somewhat artificial. There's a typical Hebrew in which the Mishnah is written, and then we switch to Aramaic. And then come a period of sort of a pseudo-Hebrew. Hebrew that is too elaborate or too, I would say rigid, but you feel that it's not a spoken language. It was created for the text. So it's a later literature. And then, as another wave in this cycle, comes pseudo-Aramaic, which is also the language that the Zohar was written on. So, in any case, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach asks his rabbi to teach him one chapter in the divine throne, meaning there it is structure, there is a text. אמר לו, לכן אמרתי לך מתחילה שאין שונים במרכבה ביחיד אלא אם כן היה חכם מבין מדעתו. I have told you already that one is not allowed to teach unless the student is wise and is understanding on his own. So Rabbi Elazar ben Arach says, let me say what I know. So let me show you that I could do that. Interesting, you see the Hebrew, Me'ata artse lefanecha. If you know modern Hebrew, the word lehartzot in Hebrew is to lecture, to deliver a lecture. A lecture in the university is called martzeh. But the original meaning of the word leratzot is to count coins. So artse lefanecha is like I'm going to present what I have as if I'm counting money. He said, go ahead. פתח רבי אלעזר בן ערך ודרש במעשה מרכבה. Rabbi Elazar opened and expounded on the divine throne. רבן יוחנן בן זכאי, ירד רבי יוחנן בן זכאי מן החמור ונתעטף בטליתו וישבו שניהם על גבי אבן תחת הזית וירצה לפניו. Rabbi Elazar opened and expounded on the divine throne. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai got off the donkey and wrapped himself with his talit. They both sat on a stone and he presented to him. He, meaning Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, stood and kissed him and said, "Blessed be God who gave such a son to Abraham our father, who knows him to understand and to expound on the glory of his Father in heaven. Some expound nicely but do not practice, and some practice nicely but do not expound, but Elazar ben Arach does both nicely." So, what have we got here in this story? It's an important story because when we get later to the Zohar literature, we will see that there are many elements that the Zohar borrowed from this short paragraph. One of them is the term patah. The term patah Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. Just making parallel here. So patah Rabbi Elazar, the idea of opening up, is before these texts, or mystical texts. The word petihta is used in midrashim. It's the opening of a drasha. It's an introduction. But when it's used in the mystical context, it means to open up something that was hidden. And sort of like I'm revealing now a mystery. So it's the idea of something which is concealed and you're not supposed to see it, but I'm opening it up. And if those who know Zohar, you'll know that many of the statements in the Zohar are presented with this term, patah. Patah Rabbi Elazar v'darash. He opened, or Rabbi Shimon, or Rabbi Hiya. It's always an opening. We also have here the dramatic setting of the teaching, meaning they're walking together. Rabban Yochanan is on the donkey. Once Rabbi Elazar starts expounding on the issue, Rabban Yochanan stops, gets off the donkey, he wraps himself with a talit. Wrapping yourself, like putting yourself in the mindset of concentration and being focused. You're not going to be distracted. He sits down, al gabi even tahat hazayit, on the stone under the olive tree. No, I don't know if there's special significance to that, but they are now focused. They're in one place. They're not moving. V'yirtzah lefanav. Then there's excitement. He gets up and he kisses him and he says, "Blessed is God who gave you this knowledge." And this is something that we will find very often in the Zohar literature, where people keep complimenting each other. In every time someone enters the class with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, they speak about how not only us but all the upper worlds and the angels are all gathering here, and they keep praising Rabbi Shimon Bar. It's a whole, as actually you could say, there's a whole genre of literature within the Zohar which is dedicated to the praises of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now, why is it done with this kind of literature? You don't find in the Mishnah. Yes, there are some references in the Mishnah to the special qualities of the different rabbis. They say Rabbi Akiva is like a merchant who collects all kind of merchandise. Rabbi Lazar is like a pit, a water well, which was covered with plaster. This way, the water don't run away. They're not soaked into the ground. So they do say, but it's a one-time statement. In the Zohar, in later literature, you will see that every time someone speaks, all those who are present are filled with awe and they praise that person. So why is it necessary? It seems almost like it's an essential element of the Kabbalah, of the mystical literature. If you know, later on we have a book called Shivhei Ari, the praise of the Ari. Later on with Hasidut, there's a book called Shivhei Abal Shem Tov, the miraculous or wonderful workings of the Baal Shem Tov. Why is it? Why do you think it's important?
It speaks to that, an acknowledgement that we are only here learning now because of what was learned before and what was permitted to before. So there's an homage paid almost to that transmission by honoring the person.
So who presents it? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, but I have, I don't know, maybe I'm too skeptic, but I have the suspicion that this was done because of the lack of transmission, because of the lack of an established tradition. When you come and whether it was or it was not taught from one master to his disciple, when you present this, eventually this literature is distributed to the masses and people do have access to it, because it is going to be written in the Tosefta, and people are going to ask, where did you get it from? Who is your source? When Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai gives this seal of approval to his student Rabbi Elazar with such strong terms, and also says that in some way this information is directly connected to Avraham Avinu, I think that is a proof that the rabbis were aware of how problematic is the presentation of that knowledge is to the people, because you are going to question, where did this come from? So you need to build it up with those kind of praises to the rabbi, to his teacher, and connect it to Avraham Avinu. And we'll see later on when we get to Sefer Yetzirah, which was composed somewhere, in the 8th century or something like that, but not later than the 9th, but definitely in the Geonic or post-Talmudic period. Sefer Yetzirah is attributed to Avraham Avinu, and that is obviously because we're trying to give it this kind of authority that otherwise this esoteric knowledge would not have had. So, and then the last phrase is also interesting. Yesh na'e doresh ve'en na'e mekayem, na'e mekayem ve'en na'e doresh, Elazar ben Arach na'e doresh ve'na'e mekayem. There are those who expound but do not practice. There are those who practice but do not expound, but you do both. So, those who expound but do not practice is referring to a specific group of people. Could be that he refers to some among, the observant Jews or the Pharisees or wherever they were. Could also be just a possibility that he is already referring to the early Christians, that it's a little too close in time to say that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was already aware of the fact that Paul of Tarsus got rid of the need to fulfill the mitzvot. So basically they remain in the realm of theology but no practice. But that could be a possibility, because just before that he says, you have given a son to Avraham who knows who's his father in heaven, as opposed to Christian theology who presents Jesus as the Son of God, who calls God his Father in heaven, or that's how they called him. So that could be there could be two possibilities. Like I said, either he refers to a certain group within the Jewish people, or to the rise of Christianity. When he speaks about na'e mekayem ve'en na'e doresh, those who practice nicely but do not expound, he's now establishing a connection between the dry legal code of the Mishnah and Maaseh Merkava. Because if, when he says that Elazar ben Arach is good, or he follows both practice and knowledge and understanding, that means that Maaseh Merkava is an explanation of the daily practice. So, in a way, he's bringing down that esoteric knowledge and says, without that, you cannot live your life as a Jew. So, that leaves it sort of, I'm leaving it open because on one hand we have esoteric knowledge, it's not supposed to be divulged to everyone. On the other hand, it says this is the ideal scholar, one who is can practice and expound.
Rabbi?
Yes.
So at this point in the history, what does the practice of the practice of mysticism look like? How would it be different than those who are? Because I'm assuming we're talking about a sectarian society where there's lots of different expressions of Jewish life, and so there would be those practicing. We were practicing halakha according to normative practice. So what would that look like within the mystical world, within the mystical understanding of those that are, either way, expounding but not practicing, or practicing but not expounding? How would that be different?
That's a good question. In the time of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was actually, you could say, a champion in the field of unification of halakha. He comes after the period of all the bitter disputes between the sects in the years that led to the destruction of Yerushalayim. We know of the Zealots, of sectarian Judaism in the desert, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes, and the Hellenizers. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is an interesting figure because he's unpopular with many different groups. He's unpopular with the Zealots because he brokered peace with the Romans. He's unpopular with the rabbis of the Davidic dynasty because he replaced them as the head of the of the Bedin. He's also unpopular with the priests and those who served in the temple before the destruction because he created a whole line of rules, of takanot, decrees that were meant to replace the temple. He moved the center of Jewish spirituality, Jewish life, to Yavneh, and basically said, don't wait for the reconstruction of the temple, but rather start a new life now. So the question is really, when he's being cast as a mystic, what does it mean? We know that when we look at the practical halakha, he was one of the rabbis who pushed for one halakha for all, which later on led to the Mishnah, that everybody now has one legal codex to refer to. But how is he cast as a mystic? So one thing that I can have in mind, it's not really, we don't have enough evidence for that, is that as a part of his attempt to replace or substitute the service of the temple with something else, he felt that one has to infuse his life with some kind of a spiritual experience, and that when he speaks about who are na'em mekayem ve'en na'eh doresh, those are the people who keep the mitzvot by rote, as a routine, without infusing them with kavanah. That is why. Okay. Yes.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just briefly, when it's referred before, how he wrapped himself in his talit, it occurred to me that was that may have also been functional the way music was in terms of an expression of, sorry for the phone, an expression of entering it. You had talked about entering a mindset that indicated, like, there was clearly a shift in the drama when he heard him expounding. Yes. So is there other evidence in text that wrapping oneself in a tallis is connected with that kind of ecstatic experience or with mystical tradition?
We have the idea that that is preserved in some communities. And during Birkat Kohanim, people cover their face with a talit. Either they do it with talit or the Kohanim, because it's sort of an emanation of divine providence or energy there. And the rabbis use in their anthropomorphic midrashim, they speak of God as someone who wraps himself with a talit. But definitely, even without these sources, when you think of someone who covers himself with fabric, with a garment, it's basically blocking outside disturbances. You're creating a sacred space where you could be alone. So that is in preparation. Okay, so now we have the famous story also there in Tosefta Hagigah of the 4 people who entered the orchard. Orchard, Pardes, is a foreign word. It's a Persian word, and from the word, was a famous Persian poet, Firdausi. This is the name. The word paradise is also taken from here, even though in a later time the rabbis said that this is an acronym of Pshat, Remez, Darash, Sod. There's an interesting development of how you take a word that is not natural to Hebrew and it becomes an acronym in Hebrew of the simple meaning, the Remez, the illusion, the Darash, the explanation, and the Sod, the secret. Yes, Sherry, you had a question? No, okay.
No, when you said Pardes, that was the first thing I was thinking of.
Oh, okay.
The acronym, I wondered if this was...
Yeah, so that's much later. The acronym comes after the word, right. So the analogy of the orchard is interesting. It's sort of a forest where you could get lost, could lose your way. There are 4 people, Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Aher, Rabbi Akiva. So 4 people, Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, other, which is Elisha ben Avuya, who became such a despised heretic that they would not even refer to him by name. Rather, he's called the other, like the one that we don't talk about. One looked and died, one looked and was harmed, one looked and cut down the trees, and one went up in peace and went down in peace. So that also we don't know from any other source that Rabbi Akiva. We have some references to Ben Zoma and also to Elisha ben Avuya, but Rabbi Akiva, this is probably the only source that indicates that Rabbi Akiva had dealt with mysticism. Sorry. In Midrash, maybe I'll pull this text for a second. 1 second. I think that's interesting to see just the role of Rabbi Akiva. That Rabbi Akiva interpreted a certain verse, and his interpretation was rejected. He then was offered the interpretation of the pasuk, and he went and he offered it to another rabbi, and again was rejected. And the rabbis told him, Akiva, ma lecha etzel agada, kalem medeberotecha, v'kalach etzel negaim v'ahalot. He said, like, what your field is not agada. you have go deal with the laws of impurity and of impurity, which is caused either by death or by leprosy. And it seems as if Rabbi Akiva was really more a legalist and not someone who was involved in Agadah. So it's just a I want to say it's not a guess, but an assumption, a possibility that the fact that the Midrash says Rabbi Akiva ala b'shalom ve'yarad b'shalom, alav ha'katuv omer moshcheni acharecha narutza. I'm going a little bit ahead. Rabbi Akiva went up in peace and went down in peace, and Scripture said about him, "Draw me, we will run after thee." Is that Rabbi Akiva was so logical that he was not overwhelmed by that spiritual experience. So his mind was, and we'll get to that when we get to Maaseh Merkava. Moshcheni acharecha narutza. Maybe I'll go a little bit ahead to explain that. You know of the term Yordei Merkava? So we have the literature called Sefrut Echalot, and the people who study this material are called Yordei Merkava, those who go down to the divine chariot. And most scholars really are, I would say, perplexed with the idea, why are they called Yordei Merkava and not Olei Merkava? Because if you look at the source that I just showed you here, the Rabbi Akiva is described as someone who goes up and not goes down. We would have thought that if someone is going up to the if someone studies mysticism, right, the description, the movement which we will attribute to that person would be one which is upward, right, and not downward. Why those people would be called Yordei HaMerkava, those who go down to the divine chariot, right? So I have a theory, I think that it has to do with this verse in Tehillim, in Psalms 107, which speaks about sailors. It says, others go down to the sea, and ships ply their trade in the mighty waters. They have seen the works of the Lord and his wonders in the deep. By his word he raised the storm wind and made the waves surge, mounting up to the heaven, plunging down to the depths, disgorging in their misery. They reeled and straggled and staggered like a drunken man, all their skill to no avail. In their adversity they cried to the Lord, and he saved them from their troubles. So this is a feeling that I think even in a small boat, I've experienced that even more in big ships that are sailing the mighty oceans, and back then their ships were not so advanced. The feeling of helplessness and the fear of drowning or being lost without anything to support you, is just terrifying. So it takes great courage for a person to do that. And how are they called in Hebrew? In Psalm 107, verse 23, Yoredei Hayam Ba'oniyot, those who go down to the sea in ships. And similarly, Yordei Merkava were people who meditated. We will see that the sort of the background or the hidden layer of the Echalot literature is basically a guide of meditation for people, how to go in and how to go out, how to not forget his self-identity, and to be able to pull himself out of this state of meditation. Because what happens in the state of meditation is that one of the things that happen is that the sense of self, of where I end and the rest of the world begins, this sense is lost. This barrier is dropped. And there is a danger of one being rewired, that it's almost as if you disassemble a machine or you open up a computer and you don't know how to put it back together. So, and that is the feeling of tremendous fear that we'll see later on when we deal with text. If you look at the text of I started translating the text from Pesikta Rabbati, you will see that sense of great fear that infuses the whole story. And Rabbi Akiva is maybe this person who's so organized, so methodical, that he's able to go in and go out. He keeps this formula in his mind and knows how to come back to reality. The other people are too open and therefore too vulnerable, and the emotions are dangerous. So about Ben Azai and Ben Zoma, we know that they never married because they said that they're dedicated to the Torah, so they're very spiritual people. They dedicate their life to study. And then we have Aher was Elisha ben Avuya. What happens to them? Elisha ben Avuya, we have the stories of him in Talmudic literature as one who was really the heretic par excellence of the Talmudic period, the Mishnaic period. The problem, again, with Elisha, just as it is with Rabbi Akiva, that other than that story, there is no indication that Elisha ben Avuya was a mystic. Rather, what the stories that we find about him is that he had questions of theodicy. He once witnessed a young boy that was sent by his father to fetch a nest of a nesting bird from a tree, and the boy fell from the tree and was killed. And Elisha said, I do not understand both these mitzvot of retrieving the nest and letting the bird go away, and honoring one's father. Both are mitzvot regarding which the Torah says, "Le'ma'an yitav lach ve'arachta yamim," you will have long life. Now I see that this boy is killed. That means that there's no reward and punishment. This whole thing is a lie. So he abandons faith, sort of, because of a philosophical concept, but not because of a being overwhelmed because of a spiritual experience. So it is possible. I don't know. It is possible that this story is fictitious, and those four rabbis were put together because each one of them has a certain standing. And interestingly enough, who is the only one who survives of the four? It's the one who represents the classic Mishnaic world, and the one whose students are reported to be the authors of the Mishnah, the Tosefta, the Midrash Halacha, etc. Meaning Ben Azai and Ben Zoma are outliers because they did not marry. They don't fit the norm. Aher is an outlier because he is a heretic. So it is appropriate to tell the story about them. And now, not regarding Ben Azai or Ben Zoma, I would say it is possible that what is written here is true. But the other two were added to show who really represents original or classic Judaism. So what happened to them? One looked and died, one looked and was harmed. So this is, as I said, it is could be a byproduct or a result of meditation that has gone wrong. People who start to practice meditation are told to have a mentor with them, so we're able to snap them out of it and bring them back. Otherwise, they could get lost. I personally have a theory. I don't know if it's, I need to talk to experts on that and see if it is true that maybe people who deal with who are theoretical mathematicians can fall into that pit because at a certain point they stretch their brain and rewire it in a way trying to understand infinity or other concepts that are really not that a human brain cannot contain, and that's why they sort of lose their sanity or maybe even their life. But I don't know if this is I'm not in the field of making this kind of observations. But I think if we know of great mathematicians who are unstable mentally or that died at a young age. So maybe this is something similar. In any case, Ben Azai and Ben Zoma, one of them died in an early age. The other one was harmed, meaning that he lost his sanity. One, which is the other, Elisha, he cut down the trees, meaning he disrupted the natural flow of nature, and it was only Rabbi Akiva who was able to come in and come out. I'm not going to read the whole text. I would like to look at the analogies, the two analogies that I mentioned here. Sorry, I jumped again. I'm here. Mashlu mashal. Lema davar dome. They said, what is this analogous to? לפרדס של מלך ועלייה בנויה על גביו. מה עליו על אדם להציץ ובלבד שלא ייזון את עיניו ממנו. This is for some reason it doesn't let me edit it. Okay. I'll edit it later. The text should be בלבד שלא ייזון את עיניו ממנו. Say, what is it similar to? The orchard of a king, and there is an attic above it. It is upon the man to look as long as he does not benefit from it. It's not yazuz et anav, to be yizon et anav. Meaning the king allows you to look into his maybe a palace, but you can't look too much in a way that you appropriate part of the king's palace. Now, this is, I think, an extremely interesting analogy, because we have from modern times the description or definition of man's spirituality as a duplex. This is, I think, before duplex was a term that was common for structures. It was used for that, and that is by Emil Durkheim. Emil Durkheim said that he coined the term homo duplex. The man is sort of like, we live in two realms, that of this world, this reality, and the attic, into which we enter once in a while, and we open the door and we say, wow, what is going on here? That's a new world that I'm not familiar with. That's the spiritual experience. and that is the analogy that is mentioned here. Again, most probably by someone who had the experience of feeling that he's now in the second floor of his own brain or his own soul. But then it says, "Ve'od mashlu mashal lema davar domeh leistera," should be istratia, which means a highway. Ha'overet ben shnei drachim, echad shel ur ve'echad shel sheleg. איתה לכאן נכווה באור, איתה לכאן נכווה משלג. מה עליו על אדם להלך באמצע, ובלבד שלא יהיה נוטה לא לכאן ולא לכאן. They gave a parable, another parable. What is it similar to? To a street that passes between two paths, one of fire, one of snow. If one leans one way, he gets burned by fire. If he leans the other way, he gets burned by snow. So one must walk in the middle and not lean to or fro. So that is the same concept of being lost at sea. It's a very perilous walk. And it's interesting that kind of imagery is found both in Islam and Christianity. In Christianity, the idea of the leap of faith, that the faithful must perform in order to reach their final destination. And in Christianity, it's the Prophet Muhammad who appears to the faithful in the form of a lamb, of a sheep, and walks on a very narrow bridge upon the abyss, and they cling to his wool, and if they are not unworthy, they fall into the abyss. Much, much later, we'll have the statement by the famous statement turned into a song by Rav Nachman of Breslev. The whole world is a narrow bridge, and the main thing is not to be afraid. So that idea of constant fear is the idea of a person who achieves a very high level of spirituality, or it could be the unio mystica, the unification with God, with himself, with the universe, and is afraid either to lose it or to lose himself. So that is on one hand it's fire, on the other one it's snow. A fire is like burning, being consumed by that fire that he feels, that spiritual experience. The snow is cooling down. He doesn't want to lose it in that manner either. And even though we go chronologically, and we're not dealing with Hasidut right now, I would highly recommend to read Arthur Green's book about Rav Nachman of Breslev, The Tormented Master, because I think that you see that the path that he describes is very similar to that of someone who could reach great heights, but then the greatest fear is either being lost at that heights and constantly staying there, or detaching himself from there and coming back to reality. So I think we'll stop here for today, and we'll finish that Tosefta, that part of Tosefta, tomorrow. The end of the Tosefta, I would like you to look into this statement of Ben Zoma, who says, "En ben mayim ha'elyonim lemayim ha'tachtonim afilu tefa." He speaks about the lower water and the upper water. And then, if you have time to review the other sources in Hagiga and in Psikta Rabati, and we'll go over that tomorrow. So now, let us see if we have any questions about that specific paragraph.